Let's talk about the art of reinvention and how you can transform from who you are to who you could become. Grab your cup of tea and let's dive into it. Reinvention isn't all about this overnight transformation. It is a gradual shift. It is imagining a different future, building skills to get there, and letting go of past identities that no longer fit. There's a quote by George Eliot, who is actually the pen name of Mary Ann Evans, who was an English novelist in the Victorian era, that says, "It's never too late to be what you might have been." So I talk a lot about reinventing yourself on this channel, but I felt like we really needed to get back to the core of reinventing yourself and the art of reinventing yourself. So, as I prepared the content for this episode, it was the morning after I had just attended an amazing Ed Sheeran concert. And it was around the point where he started to rap that I remembered how much of a shock it was when he first started to introduce rapping into his brand, because it seemed completely left field at the time from the brand that he had already established. But as I watched him perform with so much confidence and so much ease in this crowd of 50,000 plus people, it really got me thinking more about the art of reinventing yourself and how your identities do evolve. The idea of reinventing yourself is often something that is associated with careers and personal branding and sometimes social media trends, but it is actually a really old concept that is ingrained in our evolution. Ancient history, for example, has often highlighted the importance of reinvention. For example, this is symbolized in the legend of the phoenix, the bird that rises from its own ashes and symbolizes rebirth and renewal and transformation. It symbolizes our ability to be able to start again. Reinvention isn't just a social media trend. It's not just a personal branding trend or a career trend. It is our natural human instinct. It is how we evolve and adapt to our circumstances, especially as we gain new knowledge or as our life experiences change. But your reinvention isn't all about an outer transformation, it begins within. But both elements are actually really important, and that is why this is going to be a two-part series where I am going to talk about your inner transformation to begin with in this episode, and then in part two, I'm going to be talking about your outer transformation and why that is really important as well. So if you haven't subscribed already, make sure that you subscribe or stay tuned for that next episode too. But first, let's begin with point number one, and that is exploring your possible selves theory. Now, I've talked on this channel about reinventing your visual brand, reinventing your verbal brand. I've talked about reinventing your online brand. But what I really want to get into is reinventing your inner self or your multiple inner selves, which is where the theory of possible selves comes in. The possible selves theory, in its simplest terms, is the theory that describes the versions of yourself that you could become in the future. And there are, generally speaking, three different selves that you might have. You might have your hoped for self. This is the person that you hope to become. So, for example, this might be becoming successful, becoming a respected leader, or a creative professional. You might also have your feared self, which is the self you wish to avoid becoming. So this might be the person that is stuck in an unfulfilling job or the person that is financially insecure. And then you also have your expected self. So this is the self that you realistically believe that you can become because it is based on your current circumstances. So for example, this might be reaching the next tier of management. So, because of these imagined identities that you have for yourself, these identities influence your motivation, your behaviors, and your career decisions as well. Now, if you are thinking about reinventing your career specifically, then make sure you check out even more of the nuance related to this in my previous episode on rebranding your career. But for now, let's get into point number 2, which is reimagining your future identity and the power of mental rehearsal. Once you reimagine your potential identity, you start to see yourself becoming this person. So, for example, you might go from being someone who saw yourself as just an employee to someone who starts to see yourself as a founder, as a creative professional, or as a thought leader. And once this identity starts to become imaginable in your head, then your behavior starts to shift towards that identity. Now, this is something that is understood by top executives and also in sports psychology. Elite performers understand this, and something that they understand in particular when it comes to visualizing their best selves, visualizing that identity of themselves that they want to be, is the power of mental rehearsal. Because mental rehearsal means that you have a detailed visualization of what it is to become that person. You're priming your mind to become that person. You're building the neural pathways connected to that thing so that your conscious and your subconscious mind understands more and more what it takes to actually become that thing. And the research supports that even just mentally rehearsing something, so not even taking the physical actions involved, still contributes to building those neural pathways. And again, this is something that elite performers understand really well, especially athletes. Take Michael Phelps, for example, who I talked about in my recent episode on vivid visualizations. He is famously known to have pictured the entire duration of his race. He practices mental rehearsal, including all of those obstacles that he will need to overcome. And that helps him to be able to build his performance to align with that identity of what it looks like to be successful in his field. And what mental rehearsal also does is that it makes that thing more psychologically real. So you feel more motivated to pursue it. You feel more persistent towards it. And you see yourself moving towards that thing as being something that is worth it. So just as a really simple exercise, stop and picture yourself 5 years from now. What role are you performing? How do you communicate? What skills are you known for? And how do people describe your work? The clearer this picture becomes, the easier you will find it to move towards it because you understand what it is that you're moving to. Now, something that I have found really helps me to build visualization into my everyday routine in a really practical way and to put those visualizations right in front of me to make mental rehearsal a lot easier is using Pinterest. And that's something that I have talked about on this channel before, how I use Pinterest really strategically as a part of my visualization routine. Now, to start to get into more of the practical application of reinventing yourself, I want to talk about starting with skill stacking as point number 3. It is usually pretty rare that you are going to have to entirely reinvent yourself from scratch, especially in your professional field. So, entering a new era will likely not mean having to let go of all of your previous talents. And this was something that really stood out to me when I read Dory Clark's book, Reinventing You, where they simply say, you can take it with you. Remember that you have developed certain skills and a reputation in your professional field or in your personal life over time. And you can take those talents with you into your new era. You don't have to completely disregard everything. So, going back to the Ed Sheeran concert, there was a period in the concert where he was reflecting on what it was like when he first started in the music industry. And he was talking about relentless rejection after rejection, making him feel like maybe he wasn't meant to be the person that was the performer in the music industry like he had dreamed of when he was younger. Maybe he was meant to be the person behind the scenes. And so he started to pursue more of his songwriting. He tried to get in rooms with other songwriters and he made this his focus as well. And since then, he has become a renowned songwriter who is the unassuming talent which is behind many of today's big hits. And it was around this point where I turned to my husband and said, wow, even Ed Sheeran is diversifying his career. So even though there might be something that you want to pursue, think about how this actually can be connected back to what you have already done or the aspects of what you are doing that you value the most. This is where the idea of skill stacking can come in, because this can help you to create a unique and valuable combination in your skills that can propel your reinvention. It was an idea that came about from the cartoonist Scott Adams, who said that you don't necessarily need to be world class at whatever it is that you decide to do or the multiple skills that you decide to pursue. As long as you come up with a unique combination that complement each other well, and ideally come up with a combination, a rare combination that also aligns with your top 25% of your skills. So things that you are moderately good at. So you don't need to be the best in everything. It is the combination that is valuable. So when I reflected on Ed Sheeran and his rapping, it made me wonder that maybe Ed Sheeran wasn't ever trying to be the best rapper in the world. Maybe that isn't his goal. But it's this unique layering that he is creating for his personal brand that makes him unique. It's his songwriting, it's his rapping, it's his singing, it's his talent as a musician. All of these things form a unique combination that makes him a formidable force in his industry. So, for example, applying this back to your industry, how could you come up with a unique combination of skills or complementary skills that stack really well with each other? So, for example, you might be someone who is naturally good at writing, but maybe you haven't yet explored creating video content, and that is a skill that you could stack onto your writing. Maybe you are someone who can also translate that expertise that you have in your writing and then maybe your videos into public speaking opportunities. And then maybe you can also translate your field of expertise into consulting. So you can write, you can create videos, you can engage in public speaking, and you can also consult. Whatever it is that applies to you, what skills could stack really nicely with each other to create a valuable combination for your reinvention? And again, think about how you can pivot your existing skills. So, for example, you might be the journalist who pivots your experience into social media content strategy, for example. Or you might be the engineer who pivots your technical expertise into consulting. Or you could be the teacher who pivots into coaching. You don't have to start your reinvention from scratch. You can stack on these strengths that you already have. And number 4, let's talk about letting go of old identities and the concept of identity inertia. One of the tricky parts about reinventing yourself is letting go of the identities that you have held on to or that you are still holding on to. And this is something that many professionals can struggle with. You might remain attached to labels that you have had in the past, things that you were proud of in the past. For example, being an analyst, being a manager, being a specialist in a particular area. But the problem with holding on to those identities is that they could actually be the reason that you are being held back in the next stages of your evolution, in what it is that you have the potential to achieve. And this relates back to what psychologists describe as identity inertia. It's our tendency to hold on to familiar self concepts, even when our circumstances have changed. And letting go of these outdated identities can feel uncomfortable because we're letting go of a version of ourselves that served us well in the past. And there are multiple reasons why holding on to these identities can persist. It can be because they feel familiar. So we feel psychologically safer in certain roles. It can be because of external expectations. So, for example, what our colleagues or our peers might think. It can also be that we fear a loss of credibility. So it feels risky to be stepping out of the identities that we have held in the past. But a really important aspect of reinventing yourself is to reinvent yourself and to redefine yourself before others do. And when you do that, people might feel uncomfortable. They might be confused. They might even ridicule what it is that you are doing, because you are stepping outside of the predefined boxes that they have created around you, or that because of your past identities, you yourself had even reinforced. You're coloring outside of those boxes, and that can confuse them. But as Dory Clark says in Reinventing You, let people judge you based on the quality of the material you produce, not on your past history or credentials. Thanks so much. Stay tuned for part 2 on the Art of Reinvention, and I'll see you on the next episode.